Hello, and welcome back to Full Time. I am Tamerra Griffin, and I come with news. Big news. Christen Press has announced that she will retire from football at the end of this NWSL season. Let that sink in for a second, and also know that my co-host, Meg Linehan, had a meaty conversation with Christen Press and wrote up a piece that you can read at The Athletic. Christen Press has also, in true Christen Press style, decided to make this announcement very much on her own terms and wrote some letters that you can also read at The Athletic. Meg, I'm just going to bring you in now because This is a moment, capital M. Not only are we talking about Christen, not only have you spoken with Christen, but we're also going to be talking with Laura Harvey, who coached Christen Press at the Utah Royals from 2018 to 2019 and was an assistant coach on the U.S. Women's National Team during COVID 2020 and 2021 as they were preparing for the Olympics. Lots of insight there. But Meg, whoa. End of an era right now. This is major.
I think it's so interesting, too, because, staying on Christen for a moment, because we've had so many player retirement announcements. And I think, there's a much bigger show here about kind of this generation of player leaving the NWSL and leaving the game, but probably all continuing to stick around in some fashion. We need way more time than what we have on hand for today. So I think we are going to really stay with Christen and this moment. But when you think about, the ACL injuries that she's battled through, right? I think everybody kind of had the sense of she's never coming back, right? And then for her to come back and still score goals. And she was really upfront with me, not be the version that she expected of herself. She wanted to come back and be Christen Press, all caps, put the team on her back, force them to wins, get Angel City into the playoffs, get them into this place of excellence. And that's not necessarily what's happened, but there is this sense of, I don't want to say it's a messy ending in a lot of ways. And I think it's such a interesting reflection of how players have to make these decisions on when they're going to end their careers. And Christen is she's such a fascinating person to talk to. So we've got a lot to dig into, to say the least.
Truly. And I think one of the things that I am most struck by when it comes to Christen Press is how she is so firmly with one foot in each world, one in her own world. And Laura mentions this, how she wants to do things is how she does them. Intentionality, capital I, is very much a part of who she is. And I can't think of a time that she's really wavered from that, while also allowing herself, maybe against her own natural inclination or wishes, to be a face of the U.S. Women's National Team and their fight for equal pay, of Angel City. Both teams have been on roller coasters in the last decade. Well, for the U.S. Women's National Team, Angel City hasn't been around for a decade yet. But she has inhabited two very different worlds, I think, without sort of straying from who she is. And that's not something that is, one, easy, or two, something that I think we can say of most professional athletes at any point in their career, much less by the time they retire. So I'm really glad that we are going to be able to go deep. I'm glad that you were able to have such a lengthy conversation with Christen, because like you said, this is a multifaceted person, multifaceted player who's had one of the richer careers, mostly because of all the things that were happening that were off of it that she had to navigate to. All right, everyone take a deep breath, because like I said, this is big news. I'm sure a lot of you were not expecting it, but we're going to get through this together. Before I move on, though, I just have to give a sincere thank you to everyone who wrote in leading up to and since our last episode about NWSL attendance. Just to pivot really quickly, we have been really mind blown by the amount of engagement in that episode, by how many of you took time to tell us your feelings on pretty much every platform imaginable. We were shocked. And it's really, really helpful for us to know what matters to you all, what's on your minds. It helps us inform the next episodes that we might have, the next pieces that we might need to write, the next things that we might need to report. So thank you all, because that was eye-opening for all of us. And if you, and I imagine you do, have strong feelings, thoughts, questions, concerns about Christen Press's retirement, know that our DMs are always open, and especially in a moment like this, because like I said, collective processing of big news is healthy, I think. So make sure that you reach out to us via email, fulltime@theathletic.com, any of the DMs where you can find us. We want to hear from you. Just to keep the momentum going, make sure that you're following us on socials at TA Fulltime on Instagram and TikTok. We're always posting original content there. You can find these episodes on YouTube, of course. And as we learned last week, you guys love to email. So at fulltime@theathletic.com. Sorry. If you want to reach us that way. But as we have demonstrated, and as you've all demonstrated, this is a great conversation and we always want to keep it going. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, all things Christen Press. So, Meg, before we get to this moment of Christen Press's retirement, we would be remiss if we did not give an overview of all that she has accomplished. Because with a player like this, some people have known her since she was at Stanford. Some people may have known her from her club days, even leading up to Stanford. Some people might not have known that she played in Sweden, on top of course, the being a two-time World Cup winner, having played in the Olympics. Where for you, for someone who is really sort of needing the full picture of Christen Press, do you think we need to start this story of her career?
I mean, one of the things that I really started my conversation with her about was her choice to go to Sweden in 2013, because I also think, going back to some kind of terrible women's soccer history in this country, her rookie season was in women's professional soccer, the second defunct league in this country, but with Magic Jack, which we don't even have enough time to get into what Magic Jack was, but like she straight up said on record, it was probably the worst environment that she ever played in. And so when she was trying to figure out how do I keep my career going, she opted to go to Sweden. And so I think that was really kind of ahead of the curve, right? Like start of NWSL 2012, 2013, going to Europe was not necessarily like the thing to do, especially Sweden, right? Where she was like, I couldn't even really find this league on Google half the time. And so there was this sense of immediately getting that feeling of like she's going to pick something that she feels is right for her rather than necessarily like the easier, sort of more, like where everybody else is going. And so I think that relationship with Europe was one of the really interesting things for me about that. But the fact that she went to Sweden was pretty successful. I mean, played alongside Marta, right, in Sweden. But also when she comes back, her NWSL...
It's not like it was smooth immediately after that either.
I mean, this is the thing. Like when she was even doing her own career retrospective with me, it is this very strange thing where, so she's at Magic Jack for her rookie season. She goes to Sweden. She comes back and she's at Chicago Red Stars. And then I think we have to spend at least a couple minutes on how her time with the Red Stars ended, because she gets traded to Houston against her will. And it's only years later that we find out it's because in Molly Hensley Clancy's reporting for the Washington Post, everything that came out about the Chicago Red Stars and that environment, Christen Press had been highlighting how bad it was and filing HR reports. And she's traded without her consent from Chicago to Houston after an MVP caliber season. She was on the finalist list of the MVP candidates in 2017. I mean, Tamerra, were you watching? Like, were you following this real time or?
I was not. I was in Kenya and just subsisting off the crumbs of NWSL highlights that I could get on YouTube. This was pre-NWSL Plus for international folks. So I was definitely not in the front seat of this coverage. I actually, in terms of Christen Press off the field and the impact that she had, did not really come to learn about who she was and what she'd been doing behind the scenes until your investigation, until Molly's investigation and her interview with Christen. And I remember at the time, by then I was just getting started as a freelancer covering women's soccer, but I ended up writing like a reported essay basically about how, like the relationship between how much a player might be marginalized based on their identity, whether they're Black, whether they're queer, person of color, whether they come from like a poor background. And Christen was sort of one of the subjects that I used in that piece and highlighted what happens when you don't listen to those people, because the closer you are to the bottom, the sharper your vision has to be about what's happening above you. And I just felt that was such a clear and damning encapsulation of what happens when those voices are not being paid attention to. And in Christen's place, literally in Christen's case, retaliated against. So for me, it's been really interesting to sort of catch up in that sort of way, and then to speak with, people like you and even people like Laura, who were able to see those sort of building blocks as they were forming way before I came into the picture.
Right. Okay, so she gets traded to Houston, ends up opting to go back to Sweden instead. So plays in Sweden. As she's in Sweden, Houston trades her rights to Utah Royals, which are then an expansion team. She comes back, plays for Laura Harvey in Utah for that, 2-season period. And then COVID hits. And her and Tobin Heath, her wife, did not feel comfortable playing in the Challenge Cup, which was being hosted. And so they opt to go to Manchester United for that little spell. I still remember
WSL
writing the
era.
article about how well their jersey sold for Manchester United.
Wow.
Deeply popular. And then obviously, I think the chapter that probably current fans are probably really familiar are, of course, Angel City, right? And her being that, if you remember the hashtag brand or CP23 to LA, right? Like there was such a movement to make her the franchise player for Angel City. And then that time period has been derailed by these injuries with the ACL and rehab and surgeries and coming back. And I went looking for clips for the piece and watching, her first couple of goals back for Angel City, and just like, it's almost like she loses control of her limbs running back to celebrate with the team. And it's just, I don't know, watching those, knowing, okay, the time is coming to an end. It feels like it was emotional, I think, in that moment to watch those celebrations. And then it feels emotional in a very different way to watch those celebrations now.
Yeah, the Angel City chapter of her career is so raw, I think. It's easy to, make these sort of analogies with Angel City and Hollywood and storybook and narrative. But when I think about the career that Christen Press had leading up to that, and I think about how transparent and vulnerable she was, even during that time with Angel City, all of the difficulties with the multiple knee surgeries, the setbacks, and the toll that took on her, a player who has always strived for excellence, and embodied it a lot of the times, especially when she was healthy. I think it is fitting in like the most bittersweet way that she did not shy away from like talking about those challenges. There is like a through line, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, from the beginning of her career until now, in her not almost like leaning into the difficulty sometimes and finding beauty in the darkness, because she's been through a lot, and she was gracious in allowing people into that when she felt comfortable doing it. And I think once we get over sort of this initial wave of emotions in light of this announcement, I hope that we will get back to that place of just appreciation for all that she was able to share with us as she was going through all of these things.
100%. All right, and real quick, it's so funny to feel like we're going to just kind of gloss over the fact that she's a 2-time World Cup winner, but she is a 2-time World Cup winner. We think about that goal against England and the celebration, and obviously there's so much there. She also won an Olympic bronze medal. Actually, her final USA appearance was in that bronze medal game, the 4-3 win over Australia in Japan. But she finishes her U.S. career with 155 appearances, 64 goals, 23 assists. She's 9th all-time in USA goals. And when you think about maybe what could have been, it is annoying to kind of, but top 10 still. For her, I think extremely, extremely respectable. And going back to the beginning, she actually scored a brace in her debut against Scotland in Jacksonville, Florida, of all places, back in 2013.
And we will always have Christen Press, what have you done? I'm just saying.
100%. Thank you, Sebi Salazar, for that one. And I also think, one of the goals that I actually brought up with her on our call was the disallowed goal in the Olympic send-off in Hartford, Connecticut, East Hartford, Connecticut. That
the most memorable goal that was not.
Exactly.
I would say, like maybe in the world.
Just if you have not seen that clip, it is like truly one of the best all-time USA goals that was called off for being offside, and it was not actually offside. It was the whistle was hit in error. We will send that aside, but I brought that up with her, and she's like, I absolutely keep track of the goals that were disallowed that shouldn't have been because I'm a stats head and
Receipts.
again, yeah, receipts. Well, you'll hear more about that later, but that is, I mean, like we are barely able to encapsulate this career.
I do think, Meg, that when you get to talk to someone on the phone as you're making these long drives, it almost inevitably becomes a little bit of a therapy session. I mean, what was that conversation like? This obviously was a very different kind of phone call.
Yeah, I think what's so funny too is I've done so many retirement pieces this year, right? And so with retirements too, I have thoughts about a player, obviously, but I think retirements are so personal in the way that they're choosing to announce is generally a really personal choice in the timing. And so frequently I'm turning to that player and being like, what do you want to tell me? And in this case, Christen was like, no, I want you to ask me, like, what do you think is important here? What do you want to know? And that's such an interesting reversal, and also again, like, very Christen. So to have the chance to be like, okay, what actually is the idea that I want to pursue, right? And so the thing that I just really was struck by is this idea of the public perception of Christen Press and her reputation for all of these decisions that she's made versus, I think, the lens that we look at Christen Press now through, and we go, well, of course she should have the right to decide where she wants to play. Like, these are all things that players have fought for and successfully won in the collective bargaining agreement, but Christen Press has always been ahead of that curve. And there is, I think, a real sense of judgment around, women, female athletes, again, to your point, people of color, queer, like, there's a lot of factors coming into play with Christen and how she was perceived and for the choices that she was making along the way. And then being able to kind of peel back that curtain and see that personal conviction and having her say, like, it came from her mother. Like, she always felt very secure in the decisions that she was making for herself. Like, it's deeply humanizing in many, many ways. And also, like, I think we could have probably in real time done a lot more to figure out how to make that more humanizing in the moment rather than making it all about the soccer.
Yeah, it makes me think about what happens when a person has been raised with agency, when they've been raised to hold themselves in high regard, when they've been raised with high standards, and then end up moving through the world holding other people to those high standards and are unapologetic about that, and how much that must have chafed against the sort of culture of women's sports, really, of women's soccer, of the NWSL at time, which had this huge implication of, we're just happy to be here. I'm just so happy that this coach or this club took a chance on me. How often have we heard that,
Yes,
That has never
100%.
been Christen Press. She knew that she belonged at the table. She knew that she was destined for greatness. She knew that she was going to be excellent. And she was never apologetic about that. She never diminished that. And when I think about that public perception, and we definitely should be specific about who this chafed, and who was drawn to it, because on the flip side, I think about the younger generation of players, the Sophia Wilsons, the Trinity Rodmans, the Alyssa Thompsons, and how they speak about Christen Press as a player and how much they idolize her and how much that stands in contrast to how she was treated by the league, especially back when it did not even have the capacity to hold all that she was able to at the time. So did you kind of get into that tension as well in your chat with her?
Yeah, she definitely, I mean, what is interesting too is her admitting, of course she had fear, right, of stepping into this environment. And I think the other part too is the sense of being tired, right, of walking into a room and immediately having that feeling of everybody looking at you being like, okay, what is she going to complain about now, right? And because I feel like a lot of women probably really identify with that sentiment, right? And she even brought that up of, I think about, the people in the stands watching me play who are out there asking for a raise or asking for a title, asking for their value. And these are all the same things that I had to do. And there's this solidarity there. And so, she just kept talking about she never wanted anyone to dim her light. And it's such a juxtaposition between that feeling that she has, and then like what you saw from her on the field and like her goal celebrations, right? Like there could not be two more different feelings, I think, of walking into a room, asking for your value, and then scoring a goal and celebrating like Christen Press did. And so trying to hold those things at the same time, knowing that the same person was experiencing all of these things, and knowing, so also at the Athletic, Christen actually wrote these letters to herself, right? And knowing that that joy of scoring fundamentally came from being a kid and watching her parents react to her scoring goals, right? Like all of these things, I don't know, it's just like we're finally getting that 360-degree picture as much as we can, like from the outside, right? Like no one's ever really going to live in her head. We're never going to really fully understand her. But I think that has been one of the really cool things about watching Christen, even just from my vantage point over the past decade plus, of feeling like she was at times really impenetrable, and now how she approaches talking about these moments and her emotions, and needing mental health breaks when she needed them, and actually like walking through some of the stuff and being like, okay, I mean, you felt like a villain. Mm-hmm. Was anyone actually validating that feeling for you, or did you have people in your corner, right? And being able to actually kind of dig into those feelings, and knowing now, okay, she feels celebrated in a way that wasn't happening for her in the 2017, 2018 time.
Yeah, and I imagine, I mean, Meg, you mentioned that this is not at all the first retirement that you've covered. I imagine also for you, there's got to be like a similar sort of like arc, and having to cover breaking news, situations involving these players, and like writing features, investigations, and then getting to this point where you both are reflecting on, like you said, a decades plus long career, and what is sort of being pulled out in this moment as they're reflecting, even as they themselves are sort of in the midst of the announcement itself, as it's becoming more and more public. This feels, for me, like very fitting in terms of how she's making the announcements, certainly the letters. This is a player who has always done things on her own terms. Does it feel that way to you, Meg?
Definitely. Again, I don't know. I've just really come to appreciate it. Is really funny. I feel like I'll send recap show clips to my wife. Like she's not really a sports person, but she does really like Christen and Tobin. Like she watched the episode. I went out to LA to film with them for one of those episodes, and she watched that, and she's like, I think she also like really vibes with Christen, because Christen is also an Enneagram person. Like they enjoy those things. But I'll send clips, and I'm just like, I really wish that you could have experienced what it was like trying to cover them in the 2014-15 era, and just like how absurdly different it is now. And so it is really funny for me to just be like, man, like if you had told me in 2015, right, that to cover both of their retirements, right? Because Tobin went through her own process, even though the injury for her, landed in a different direction. I think it is absolutely a privilege to have the trust of these players to like want to have these conversations and want to go deep into those emotions. But there is also just a tiny part of me that's cracking up to even have those conversations at all, because I just feel like the culture around those conversations has changed so drastically from the early days of the league.
Totally. All right, let's pivot a little bit to our reflection on Christen Press as a player. We had a conversation with Laura Harvey, current head coach of the Seattle Reign, but who also coached Christen Press at the Utah Royals from 2018 to 19. Also spent some time with her during COVID, during 2020, as they were preparing for the 2021 Olympics, along with Tobin. She also has a very interesting perspective on Christen, their relationship, sort of the like milestones, and how their relationship deepened over the past few years. And also even more broadly, because like I said, this is an era ending. There have been a slew of retirement announcements this season alone, and even more within the past week or so. I'm talking about Lou Barnes of the Seattle Reign, OG of the highest order. So let's chat with Laura about what all of this means and what she's noticed over the years.
All right, we are now joined by friend of the pod, Seattle Reign head coach Laura Harvey. And Laura, I just want to start us off by, it feels like we were just talking about the end of an era with some of these player retirements that have come through. I mean, can you just speak to this moment and what the league is going to feel like without all of these players being on the field day in, day out?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it. I think there's the side of being like sad that they're not there anymore. But I think for them as a group, there's a lot of them now, to be really proud, of handing it off to the next generation and feeling like it's in a better place than it was when they found it. So yeah, I think it's like a double-edged sword, but I think both sides of it are fun and enjoyable. To be able to celebrate someone's career like Lou Barnes with our club is exciting, and just reminiscing on all those crazy adventures that we've been on. And then to think about, where she found the league specifically and how she's leaving it, it's unrecognizable. So yeah, I think it has two sides to it for sure.
Yeah, that sort of statement about leaving the game in a better condition than you found it is one that has been recurring across a few generations now, I think, in women's soccer. And Laura, when I think about a player like Christen Press and how she will be remembered, maybe one of the few players who will be remembered as much for what they did off the field as what they did on. I'm curious how early, I guess, people who have known her for a long time started to sort of like get the sense that she was going to be that kind of player. So my question for you is what do you remember about the first time you met Christen Press? And what was your first impression like?
Yeah, well, I got to work with Christen later in her career, like 2018 was when we first worked together. And I can't remember if we've actually formally met before that, but we sort of knew of each other, let's say.
Right.
And then she came to Utah and played for me at Utah. And at this point, they were already negotiating the CBA. I can't remember what stage it was at, but there was definitely talks. And Christen was in that locker room with me. Kelly O'Hara was in that locker room with me. Becky Sauerbrunn was in that locker room with me. And you could tell that, especially in 2019, maybe more than 18, that there was something bigger that they were fighting for than what we were turning up every day and training about, right? So obviously they were preparing for a World Cup, which became monumentous, right? It was huge. But then also on the side that they never really spoke about, they'd ask like poignant questions at times, and I'd be like, that's a bit of a weird off the fly question, but didn't think much of it at the time. And then after was like, oh, that's probably why they're asking that. But Christen was always and has always been very, very intentional in how she operates, right? She knows at the point when I had her, she knew what she needed. She knew what her herself needed to be able to be ready to play a game. She knew what she needed from people around her to help provide her with what that was. And she just had this self-driven motivation of she wanted to be the best. And there was just nothing that was going to stand in her way of doing that, right? And I was her club coach when she had the unfortunate time of her mum passing, which was huge for her. But again, in that period leading up to the World Cup, arguably you wouldn't have known. You wouldn't have known in our sort of work environment that that's what she was dealing with. And I obviously got to know her a little bit more along the way of those 2 years of working with her. That just because she didn't show it, it didn't mean it wasn't there. It was there, right? And it was something that, she speaks about openly now. She didn't really speak about it openly then. But then, you saw her celebration at the World Cup when she scored the header, and then all the things she's talked about after it. Just like, I was thinking to myself not long ago, like, I'm just so glad we gave her the space to do what she needed to do, right? And then myself, Christen and Tobin were in LA during COVID, and my job at that point was to assist Vlatko and do the U20s. And the only thing we could do was like small group training sessions with people in our area because we couldn't fly. So me, Christen and Tobin spent a lot of time at the LA Galaxy facility. I don't know what it's called now, Dignity Health or whatever it's called. Doing like individual training. And even then, like, I'd turn up early and I would get all this stuff set up. And then within like 2 or 3 sessions, I was like, this isn't about what I want. It's about what they know they need. And Christen was so adamant about what that was. And again, like our relationship forged a little bit more during that time because it was just the 3 of us, with a sole aim of getting ourselves ready for the Olympics. Like that was what we didn't know when it was going to happen. We didn't know if it was going to happen, but that's what we were preparing for. And yeah, good fun times with that too. So really proud of Christen. I think what she's done over the last couple of years at Angel City, getting herself back from injury, just being around and like listening to her, speaking to her, seeing her. Her love for the game has grown, which I'm not sure you would think that about someone late in their career, but you can just see it in how she operates and how she handles herself.
I mean, Laura, from your perspective, you've been around the NWSL from the beginning. You've seen what these players have built. I mean, how do you even view your role, right? And as we talk about all of these players like Christen, like Lou, like Veronica Latsko, right, who might be going a little under the radar as all of these announcements are coming out, right? Like, these are players who excelled on the field at multiple levels. But how do you view your role in trying to make sure that like people properly appreciate, especially the club career, right? Like I feel like, for Christen, right, everybody's going to point to that goal against England in the 2019 World Cup. Yeah. And that's going to be the highlight that we see over and over. But like, how do you celebrate maybe the small moments that you've seen from players like these and know like, actually, that's maybe the true essence of who a player is?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think everyone will celebrate Christen, and rightly so, for everything that she achieved on the field and off it with the national team. Like that will be the main story, right? And I understand that. But I think of things like up until Christen tore ACL, she was always available to play. Always. Mm-hmm. So no matter what was happening on that side of the coin, at club level, I think she knew she needed that to be able to do what she was doing over there. And then you've got someone like Lou Barnes, who has never really had that international recognition. Her recognition is at club level. And I think my job in relation to someone like Lou is to say exactly what that means. And for someone to have played 250 games in the NWSL is a phenomenal achievement. To do it for one team, I don't think you'll see again. That's my opinion. I actually hope I'm wrong. But I just don't, with the way that the market is changing constantly, the way that, free agency and all those types of things now can impact potentially in positive and maybe negative ways what players' outcomes of their careers can look like.
I've had a few conversations with players who have seen and been with the league from the beginning, and it's always interesting to hear them sort of reflect on how much has changed. I'm curious what your conversations with players like Lou are like as you're navigating these changes together, because I personally am around the same age as a lot of these players who are retiring. And even in my own capacity as a journalist, I think about, the younger generation of journalists, and I have a combination of like, oh my God, they didn't have to go through this and that, with also like good that they don't have to, they're only faced with unpaid internships or whatever. So I'm curious what your conversations have been like with players as they are living through the changes, seeing the things that younger players don't have to deal with, seeing how much the league has changed and how much more it's giving them, and how you as a coach sort of help them navigate those changes too. Because I can't imagine that it's all smooth or without, some tension to it.
Oh, absolutely. I think as you're like asking the question, I'm thinking, yeah, there were some bad things, but there were some really good things too. Like there were some really cool things that we did. And I think that's what we talk about, honestly. Like when we talk to the younger players, it's from our club's perspective. I can only talk from the rain, really, but we sort of laugh about it. Of like, imagine if you had to deal with this. And they'll be like, oh, no way we could have dealt with that. I'm like, that's what we dealt with. And, it's sort of like we do it in more of a jovial way because we've come through it. And I think that that's the sign of what these players brought. They were resilient. They were willing to do the hard yards to be able to get this thing where they wanted it to be. And I don't think anyone thinks the league is where we all want it to be today. It's definitely in a better place than it was. But how cool is that we're still striving for more? And I think what's been really cool in the last 2 years for me individually, is we've got a lot of young players at our club. I think we've got 4 under the age of 21, maybe something like that. And we've got loads under the age of 25. I mean, it's got to be over 10. We've got a leadership group now that has a lot of young players in it. And Lou and Jess have been part of that leadership group. And just seeing how they've mentored some of these young ones into those leadership roles. Honestly, it's been, this year especially, it's been the highlight of my year, is just watching the balance between the two of like how they see it, the older ones, versus how the younger ones see it and how they bring it together. I think it's been amazing. And that's something that will sit in Lou's legacy too.
Laura, before we let you out of here, I know you have training and obviously the season is coming to a close, but what you just said about Lou, I mean, I had a long conversation with Christen ahead of her retirement, and I think one of the themes that we really hit on is that demanding more, right, and wanting more, and maybe sometimes the price for these players for wanting more. I think, we've all seen it firsthand. Christen, I think, has had one of the more interesting experiences in terms of like maybe having that outside reputation of being demanding or like having, like walking into an environment and being like, no, actually, this does need to be better. But I mean, what have you seen firsthand from these players who go in and want to have that fight, right? And who are willing to maybe earn that reputation in order to make things better for that next generation.
They're just steadfast in what they believe. And they'll bring receipts. Like they're not just messing about, and Christen's like that. Becky Sabrin's like that. Megan Rapinoe was like that. Like they all have it of where if they believe it and they believe it to be true, they're steadfast in their thoughts. And like at the Reign, we had Megan, Jess, and Lou for a long, long time. And the three of them were all very different in how they operated, but they were all very steadfast in what they believed. Pino, she'll speak to anyone, right? She'll stand up in front of anybody and say what she thinks. Jess is going to really hone in on the football, and Lou's the glue that holds it all together. And honestly, I think about like a Christen, Becky, Pino. They're pretty similar. Alex Morgan sits in the Pino realm, right? And Becky's not going to be the one shouting it from the rooftops, but she's going to be the very behind the scenes, methodically gluing it all up together. And Christen's probably the brains of the operation, right? Like she is very, very smart, like extremely smart. And again, when she believes in something, she's not going to go out and shout about it immediately. She's going to think it through and make sure she's got all the receipts and got it all nailed down. And then when she's comfortable and feels confident about it, she'll tell Pino what to say, and then she'll back Pino up. And I think that's been an amazing thing to see these different groups of women work in, like sort of from an outsider looking in with the national team, and then see how these three operated at the Reign, because that's exactly how this club's operated for 13 years. The three of them felt something, thought something, got information from the group, would bring it to leadership of the club, and would do it in those ways. And when they didn't think it was right, they would say it. And Lou would say it differently to how Pino would say it, and Jess would say it differently to how Lou would say it, but they'd all say it. And I think that that's a really cool thing that I hope they pass on to the next generation too, because we need it.
I was just thinking about what you mentioned earlier about the mentorship, and it's going to be really interesting, I agree, to see how both that sort of skill, I think, is passed down to really be able to play to each other's strengths. Also in this new environment, I can't wait to see that. And I think it's so cool that you've been able to witness all of these different changes with these veterans, these superstars, and these up and coming players. So thank you so much for joining us, Laura. We appreciate your insight as always, and we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you.
What a human, what a player, what a gift it's been for all of us. No matter when you first learned about Christen Press, she is someone who I think has given you something to walk away with in terms of memorable moments, Meg. What has been, it doesn't have to be the most, because these kinds of questions stress me out sometimes, especially when you're looking at like an expanse of a career like this. But what sort of rises to the surface for you when you think about how you will best remember Christen Press?
Yeah, I do think Laura said something that really struck me, right, of Christen kind of being the one in the back with the receipts, right, like feeding stuff. And I think that was always a real sense that I got just as someone who covered the equal pay fight, right, and I think just the amount of time that I spent with a lot of the core players involved with that, talking to them about that. And when the new CBA was signed, the team was playing in Washington, D.C. There was like a really brief celebration thing after, right? And I think just the vibe that Christen had of like, okay, job done. Like, what's next, right? Like, yes, we're going to celebrate, but also, okay, how do we make things better, right? And wanting to both live in that moment and also use that moment of, okay, like, this is how it feels to celebrate this win, and we have to just make sure that this energy keeps going. And so that, to me, is one of the things that I'm always going to really think about is just, yeah, what she kept saying in that moment of, okay, we got here and we got what we deserved. But that doesn't necessarily mean that any of our work is actually done right at the moment.
This might be a bit of a left field top memory, and it's not really a single one. It's sort of a way about her. As a fellow California girl, I always am really drawn to the ways that players relate to the game. And I think about how, for me at least, Christen Press was sort of the one to normalize what it means to walk around the pitch barefoot before a game, to meditate, to be talking about things like bliss. She did an interview a few years ago where it's felt like a meditation on what it means to play with bliss, and, just enter that flow state. And I think, when you look at teams like Angel City, the girls are into the crystals and reflections and breath work and all of that, and I love it. But I also think that Christen Press made those things, that sense of deep mindfulness, a part of her game, and sort of like created this path for people to tie that to the game of soccer. And we see the ways that has been benefiting people now. And I think it goes back to what Laura said, that really struck me, which is that this has always been a player who knows what they needed and wasn't afraid to articulate that. I think that is such an underrated life skill because, and especially for women, right? We're discouraged from that from birth. And as we talked about, I think Christen's ability to name that is both one of her greatest strengths and one of the things that sort of define a target on her back at most times, because we're not supposed to be demanding things that we need. We're not supposed to be in touch with what our needs are. And for me, honestly, I think that that's one of the things that I just tip my hat like aggressively to, because there's something radical even about that, that I don't think gets talked about enough in the women's game. It's changing, but she's definitely going to be always a pioneer in that regard for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole article, right? Like I don't think I hide the fact that I'm kind of obsessed with this idea of, again, this public perception of her for a really long time through her career and the way that that's changed. And, I think the fact that she had this reputation of like, I would argue it's selfish, right? Of these are the things that I need, or like, this is where I'm going to go play. This is what is right for me, right? And yes, it's a team sport and all of these, there are all of these factors that have to be brought in, but I don't like, again, to your point, women are taught like it shouldn't be about you, right? And especially I think within a team sport or a league environment, you're told, okay, be grateful, or, this is your role within the system. And I think there has to be some allowance for people to look out for their own self-interest. And to her point, like it is both a stubbornness and a bravery. And like all of these things can exist at the same time. And Christen, for me, is one of those players where you had to hold a lot of things at the same time to properly appreciate her. And that's how she wanted it, right? Like, I don't know if she always could articulate that that's how she wanted it, but now I think she's fully able to articulate and be like, let me open this door to you and let me explain all of these things that are going through my head at any given moment as to why I feel and what I'm doing and what I want to tell you about it. And it's just such a good change, I think, in this space. Like, it's not something that I think for a lot of those players who are in that, I mean, she called the U.S. Women's National Team the Hunger Games every day, right? Like, that was that environment at that time. Like, it was cutthroat. It was a place where you had to be selfish in a lot of ways. But there was that disconnect too between the national team and the NWSL, and feeling like you were obligated to play where U.S. Soccer wanted to put you, and so we can look at this through 2025 glasses and be like, well, of course she did what she did. But it was, I think, hopefully in our conversation, I think she got across the point of how hard it was in that moment to make that decision. And I think that's the really important part about this conversation, is like, yes, this is not a perfect ending. It's not a happy ending. It is the closing of a chapter, right? Like that phrase is always going to be overused, but it's always true that this is the closing of a chapter, and everything that she's learned through this career is going to then inform whatever the next chapter is. And ultimately, for Press, for Lou Barnes, for all of these players who have come up in this generation, they have built something for the next generation of players. They have not been able to like truly enjoy all of the fruits of that fight. But, you know, I think with Christen, at least we know like she's not really going anywhere either. So.
Right. And I think too about, in terms of her legacy, has there ever been another player after whom we've named a finishing school? Like, the fact that that has just become part of the NWSL lexicon at this point. You know, a player might be going through a rough patch with scoring, and you might hear someone who says, oh, they need to go to Christen Press finishing school. We talked about that even in relation to players of that next generation, like Alyssa Thompson. Like, yes, there is the sporting side, but there's also like the ripple effects of the sporting side too. And the amount of joy that her goals brought, like, she might be the most like joyful scorer in U.S. women's national team history, with the most memorable goals, the most like they moved you. And I think that speaks to the joy that she played with, which becomes almost even more impressive when you consider, like we've talked about, how much she has been carrying throughout her career, not just in moments. You know, she's grieved on multiple levels, not just with the loss of her mom, but I'm sure there were other things like injuries, like not being appreciated and understood or respected. And then to be able to perform the way that she did and to rile like so many different emotions in crowds, which I know she talks about in her letter to her dearing, darlingest fans. It's just impressive. And I think it's going to be a while before we encounter another player who's even in this sort of realm of Christen Press, just given how multifaceted she is, and all of the different sort of phases that we were able to witness throughout her career. So it's like an end of an era in terms of the type of player she is, in the midst of this era of this generation of players sort of hanging up their boots. And as someone who, as I mentioned, did not follow her career from the very beginning, it feels really special to be able to contribute to the way that she's going to be remembered now. I can only imagine how you feel with that.
I mean, this is...
Is it emotional? Like...
It is, like, it's just such a strange part of the job, right? I mean, and that's why I think it meant a lot of Christen at the start being like, no, actually, I want to know what you want to know, right? I want to read what you want to write about me, because I think there is always that responsibility of you have your own take about like watching a person, how they carry themselves and their career as a whole. And so it's a big ask, and it's always, I get stressed writing those pieces. I get very, very stressed writing those pieces, and I'm mentally going, okay, well, tomorrow morning I'm either going to get like a thank you, or I'm going to be like, whoa, okay. So
we do not talk about the stress of publishing a big story enough in this job, but just know it's stressful. It's real stressful. It's like opening day of like a major Broadway production or something. But what a gift at the same time. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are not even things that were happening a decade plus ago when superstars were able to hang up their boots. So even for us to be able to have this conversation in the depth that we are is a sign of how much the game has grown. And I don't know, there's sort of that meta like understanding that it's players like Christen Press, it's players like Lou Barnes, Kristen Hamilton, this whole wave
Allie
of
Riley. We haven't talked about Allie Riley. Like, I'm wearing my New Zealand sweatshirt for her, and then
Oh, I love that. Contributed to what we're to the conversations we're able to have now and the flowers we're able to give. So maybe this is just my way of trying to like soothe the emotions, because I'm sure that this is going to be a lot for people. But like I mentioned earlier, we want to hear what you're feeling. We want to hear what you're thinking. We didn't even really touch on what this means from like an Angel City perspective. I'm thinking about Sydney Leroux as one of sort of the last standing veterans at that team as they are shifting into yet another phase of their existence. There have been a few. Angel City fans have been through a lot. They've had to say a lot of goodbyes, some that maybe they saw coming and certainly some that they did not. We didn't even touch on that. But like I said, this episode needs to be about Christen Press and all that she has given to the game. This is just one small offering of what we're giving back to her in return. And we appreciate you listening. That's our show. Like I said, make sure that you're following us on all of the socials at TA Fulltime, Instagram and TikTok especially. And if you didn't know, The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to deliver the very best coverage of women's sports. Tear that the W is ending. But love to the Aces. I am still watching that one Asia Wilson shot in game.
I mean, to be fair, it's about
4.
to be real CBA time over there. So
true. The
the
Nafisa
stories
Collier
are
of it
not
all.
ending anytime soon.
Truly. All the more reason to check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. We will put the link, as always, in the bio. Whoo, Meg. This has been a lot today.
No, everything is happening all the time. I'm Meg. You can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky. And also, you can watch these shows on YouTube as well, if that's something that you prefer to do. It's up to you. But we're over there at The Athletic Fulltime.
I am Tamerra Griffin. I am probably going to be looking for the best Christen Press highlight reels on YouTube. But you can also find me on Instagram and Blue Sky. This show is not possible without our podcast producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our executive producer, Emily Olson. Thank you, as always, for listening. Flowers on flowers on flowers to Christen Press, and we will see you next week.